Zoe, 14, lives in a trailer behind a faded Los Angeles Carnival. While others ride the spinning wheels, she studies their motion, sketching energy loops on a cracked gear. When Harvard fails to fix a billion-dollar power flaw, a professor scoffs. You, a Carnival girl? But Zoe's model turns heads. Her uncle died in a blackout. Now the wheel spins for him. Will Harvard finally listen? Zoe adjusted a strap of her tool bag as the sun slipped behind the Ferris wheel. The carnival lights buzzed to life, casting flickers of blue and red over the cracked pavement. Behind the games and rides, where the generators groaned and wires tangled like weeds, a rust-colored trailer stood hunched beneath a bent power pole. That was home. Inside, the air was thick with grease and motor oil. Uncle Ray knelt over a busted popcorn machine, elbow deep in metal and sparks. "Hand me the crescent wrench, Zoe," he muttered, not looking up. She didn't need to be asked twice. She passed it to him and wiped her hands on a rag already streaked with axle grease. Her hoodie sleeves were rolled high, revealing bruises from climbing under ride frames to check for loose wiring. "You skipped dinner again," Ray said, tightening a bolt with a grunt. Zoe shrugged. "Didn't notice?" Ray gave her a sideways glance. "You always notice, just not when your head's in the gears." Zoe opened her worn notebook, corners curled, spine taped 3 times over, and flipped to a page where concentric circles spun out from a jagged axle. She tapped her pencil, frowning. "The graviton's losing momentum too fast. I think it's a torque balance issue." Ray paused. "Torque balance, listen to you." Zoe looked up. "I read something last night, some article about magnetic drive compensation. The pattern's familiar, like the spin's fighting itself." Ray studied her for a second. His face always looked tired at the end of the day, but tonight there was something heavier in his eyes. "You think like someone who builds things that last," he said softly. "Not like someone who just patches what's broke." Zoe blinked. "That bad?" He smiled. "No, that rare." Outside, the music blasted from the tilt-a-whirl speakers. Kids screamed with joy, but Zoe stayed still, eyes flicking back to her sketch. The spinning wheels, the graviton, the cyclone, the star glow, all operated on different systems, but they shared something. A pattern, a hidden rhythm beneath the chaos. She didn't know it yet, but that rhythm would change everything. Later that night, after the carnival shut down and the last car rolled off the lot, Zoe climbed the ladder behind their trailer and sat on the roof with her sketchbook. From there, she could see the entire fairground, wires draped like veins, blinking lights pulsing like a mechanical heartbeat. She flipped to a clean page. In the silence, she drew. Loops, axles, windings, force direction, a makeshift grid. Then she drew a single red dot, ink from a scavenged pen, right at the center of a spinning wheel. She circled it twice, then labeled it. Stable core? From inside, Uncle Ray coughed, deep, wet, the kind of cough that sounded like something broken inside. She clenched her pencil tighter. They couldn't afford a doctor. They barely afforded light. Down below, the generator gave a low sputter. The trailer lights flickered once, then steadied. Zoe whispered, "Hold on, okay?" I'll figure something out. At sunrise, while others slept, Zoe slipped into the maintenance tent. She wasn't supposed to be there without Ray, but she had an idea. She stood in front of the graviton's control panel, flipped it open, and pulled the old motor rotation logs. 30 years of data on a dot matrix sheet, yellowed and curled. She squinted at the numbers, and there it was, a dip, a steady pattern of loss, always during high humidity, always after 18 minutes of run time. No one noticed because the ride could still spin, but Zoe saw it. The drop wasn't random, it followed a cycle, like a signal in noise. She whispered, "There's a leak in the system, and no one's patched it right." She took the sheet and ran back to the trailer. The log clutched like a treasure map. Ray wasn't up yet. His cough had gotten worse. She slid the log into her notebook right next to her sketches and labeled the page in capital letters. Spin, ikakol, loss, plow, wind, ixies, ram, recovery. She underlined it 3 times. And just as she capped her pen, she heard a knock at the trailer door. A man in a dark jacket stood outside, holding a clipboard with the words Harvard Energy Grant Evaluation, Site D, printed on top. He looked past her, eyes scanning the mess of wires and generators behind the rides. "You the maintenance head?" he asked. Zoe shook her head. "That's my uncle." The man frowned. "We're evaluating small-scale systems for kinetic feedback. Your site flagged a failure 3 nights in a row." Unusual loss patterns. Someone here filed a report? Zoe blinked. She hadn't told anyone. Yet somehow, the world had just knocked back. And it wasn't the last time. The man with the clipboard stepped inside, eyes moving past Zoe to the humming generator in the corner. "You filed the report?" he asked again. Zoe hesitated. "No, sir, but I noticed something with the wheel speeds. I think it's leaking force, not power, like the motion's bleeding." He blinked. "You're how old?" 14, she said, straightening. He scanned the room again, then pulled out a tablet. "Name's Dr. Ronan Beck, Harvard's Applied Energy Division. We're auditing kinetic systems across California. One of your rides tripped our anomaly sensors. That's not nothing." Zoe stepped forward. "If I show you something, will you tell me if it makes sense?" He raised an eyebrow. "If it's relevant, sure." She grabbed her notebook from the counter, flipped past sketches of ride gears, and held the page with the circled red dot. "This wheel, it mimics orbital drift, only tighter. I think the design's unintentionally recycling velocity, but it decays too fast." He stared at the drawing. "Where did you learn to model forces like this?" "I didn't, I just saw it." Ronan paused, then took a breath. "Listen, this isn't about a Carnival ride. There's a bigger issue, way bigger. A renewable storage loop Harvard's been testing. Something's off in the return cycle. Power in doesn't match power out. My professor flagged it last year." No one listened. Zoe's heart thudded. "Because the loop loses motion mid-cycle?" Ronan stared at her. She continued. "Like a wheel slipping at just the wrong point." He looked down at her sketch again, slower this time. Then he smiled, faint, guarded. "Where's your uncle?" he asked. Uncle Ray was coughing when Zoe walked him out. He leaned heavy on her shoulder. You didn't touch the graviton's motor, did you? He rasped. No, she whispered. Just the logs. Ronan glanced between them. We're conducting a symposium next week in Pasadena. I can't promise anything, but I'd like your niece to sit in. Just listen. Ray coughed again. She's not part of your school. She might need to be, Ronan said, then handed Zoe a folded sheet. I'll be presenting this. A failed system. Your notes? Bring them. Just observe. Zoe opened the paper after he left. It was a schematic, complex, sterile, full of dense arrows and dead-end circuits. But buried near the center was a loop, a spinning cycle, labeled in faded text. Retention drop, phase C, unresolved. She underlined it with her pencil, then flipped to a blank page in her notebook and began to draw. The Pasadena Science Forum smelled like dust and old wires. Zoe had never been anywhere like it. Marble floors, glass doors, walls lined with framed photos of scientists in clean coats. She wore a faded gray hoodie and borrowed jeans. Her seat was in the last row. From the stage, Ronan clicked through slides. The Velar cycle was meant to store renewable energy in magnetic compression loops. But somewhere between intake and retention, force is lost. Over 6% consistently. And no one knows why. A professor in a sharp suit leaned in. Then the system's flawed. Scrap it. Ronan didn't blink. Or misunderstood. Zoe leaned forward. She didn't speak. Not yet. But she drew quietly on recycled paper torn from an old map brochure. She sketched the wheel. Then, over it, the Velar cycle schematic. Her pencil trembled. They were almost the same. Almost. Except, she circled a node near the edge, a point every speaker ignored, a dead wire in the diagram, one labeled as simply bypass, unconnected. So he looked around. No one else saw it. She raised her hand. The room paused. The sharp-suited professor frowned. Yes? So he stood. Her voice shook. I think the system's slipping. At the unconnected bypass, it's bleeding force like the graviton does. The room laughed, lightly at first, then sharper. Is this a Carnival analogy? Someone muttered. The moderator cut in. Thank you, young lady. This is a peer-level discussion. Zoe sat down, red-faced. She looked at her paper, now folded in her lap. Her recycled drawing, her circled dot, the wheel. Uncle Ray's cough echoed in her ears. She whispered, I heard something I can't ignore. And behind her, Ronan stood up slowly, turned to the moderator, and said, She might be the only one here who sees it. The bus ride home was silent. Zoe sat by the window, her recycled paper folded neatly in her lap. Outside, the lights of Pasadena faded into the shadows of the highway. Uncle Ray sat beside her, still coughing into his elbow, his eyes half closed from exhaustion. You okay? She asked. Ray nodded slowly. You did something in there? He murmured. Didn't matter, they laughed. You stood up. Zoe looked down at her sketch. The circle was still there, still spinning. Back at the trailer, she stayed up long after Ray had fallen asleep. The clock blinked past midnight. Her desk was a crate turned on its side. Her lamp was a camping lantern balanced on a soup can. She pulled out the rusted wheel from behind the graviton, one they had replaced weeks ago for being too warped. She cleaned it with an old rag, then grabbed her notebook. The edges were curling worse now. The spine had cracked. She taped it again, adding a fourth layer. Then she traced the velar cycle diagram onto the wheel itself, using chalk and leftover white paint from the bumper cars. Every curve, every node, she marked the unconnected bypass in red. "This is where it slips," she whispered, "where energy should return but doesn't." She ran her fingers over the metal, felt its cold resistance, then looked at the pages she'd filled in the last 2 days. Notes, angles, old Carnival rotations, and in the center of it all, always the same shape, the circle, the spin. She picked up her broken pencil, sharpened it with a razor, and wrote, "Spin is the bridge, not the source." That night, something shifted, not in the world, but in her. The next morning, Zoe visited the maintenance shed. Ray wasn't up yet. She moved carefully between rusted shelves and stacked motor parts, found a spool of copper wire and an old bicycle dynamo, and stuffed them into her backpack. She walked to the junkyard 3 blocks away. It was still closed, but the fence was low. She climbed it, quiet, like she'd done before, not to steal, just to borrow pieces of thought. Inside, she spotted what she needed, a windmill blade from an old roadside display still attached to half a motor. She hauled it onto a cart and wheeled it back, hands blistering, breath shallow from the weight. At the trailer, she anchored the wheel to a frame she built from broken scaffolding. She connected the dynamo, wrapped the copper in loops, created her own closed system. Then she spun it. It wobbled. She spun it again. The red bypass line blurred. Zoe stood back, eyes narrowed. No, something's still wrong. She pulled out the velar cycle diagram again. Her eyes jumped across the notes. The retention delay, the phase drop, the bypass. Her hands trembled. Then she saw it. The system didn't fail at the bypass. It failed because the loop assumed constant force return. But if you built in compensated slippage, like the Carnival rides used for braking safety, there would be loss, yes, but predictable, modelable, like a dance step you plan for. She turned the wheel again, slower this time, let the red mark dip. It came back smoother, not perfect, but alive. Zoe ran inside, tore a page from her notebook and labeled it loss equal predictive re-entry. Then, beneath it, a new equation, not copied, not memorized, not borrowed, hers. She stared at it and whispered, "I see it differently now." That afternoon, Ronan called. His voice was sharp, almost rushed. "Zoe, I'm at Harvard. Something happened." "What?" "They published the velar model, final version, but the bypass note, it's still unconnected. They ignored the anomaly. Again." Zoe gripped the wheel. "They're going to scale the system," he continued. "They're putting it into field production next month. 5 states. Zoe looked at her wheel and the red line that never closed. "I think they're about to lose everything," she said softly. "Can you show me your model?" Ronan asked. "Tomorrow, I'll fly in. Whatever this is, it's real." Zoe's voice steadied. "It's not finished, but it's spinning." Zoe stood in the back of the lecture hall, clutching her worn notebook like armor. Her name wasn't on the agenda. No one had invited her to speak. But Ronan had insisted she come. The room buzzed with voices. Scientists, engineers, policy directors, all gathered to hear Harvard's final Velar model announcement. The stage lights were too bright, the room too clean. "Are you sure I should be here?" she whispered. Ronan leaned in. "You see what they missed. That's enough." Then came the voice from the stage, crisp, confident, Professor Alden Monroe, head of Harvard's Advanced Energy Systems. "Ladies and gentlemen, the Velar cycle is no longer theory. It's real, field-tested, reliable." Zoe's stomach twisted. He clicked to a slide, a smooth schematic. The same model. Still no correction at the bypass. The flaw was still there. Zoe raised her hand. Monroe didn't notice. She raised it higher. This time he squinted. "Yes, you in the back?" Zoe's voice wavered. "The bypass loop is unstable. It bleeds retention on rotation. I tested it myself." The room paused. Monroe blinked. "Excuse me?" Zoe stepped forward, heart pounding. "I built a physical model. With compensated slippage, you reduce force loss by 7%. It's not a flaw. It's a pattern you can control." Laughter broke out, scattered at first, then louder. A man in the front row scoffed. "Are you serious?" "She's the girl from the Carnival," someone out said. Monroe raised an eyebrow. "You're the maintenance assistant, correct?" "I'm his niece," Zoe said, voice steady now. "But I'm not just that." Monroe turned toward the crowd. "And what equations did you use? What software did you simulate this with?" "I used chalk," she said, "and a wheel." "That did it." The room erupted in muffled laughs and sideways glances. Someone whispered, "This isn't a science fair." Monroe shook his head. "With respect, young lady, we have real engineers here." Zoe's cheeks burned, but she didn't move. She opened her notebook, held it up. 4 layers of tape, pages frayed and dirty, diagrams drawn on scraps. One page marked in red, her compensation curve. "They laughed," she said quietly, "but I won't stop." Monroe turned away. "Let's move on," he said. But Ronan didn't sit down. He stood, his voice clear. "You told me once, Professor, that good science isn't about status. It's about solving what others ignore." Monroe's jaw clenched. "I stand by that." "Then listen," Ronan said. "She found something your labs didn't. She modeled phase drop manually, by hand, and her data matches your anomaly logs." Someone in the third row leaned forward. "You verified that?" "I did," Ronan said. "I saw the wheel myself." More murmurs. The laughter slowed. Monroe gave a stiff smile. "That's generous, Dr. Beck, but we can't delay deployment because of a teenager's backyard experiment." Zoe stepped forward again. She pulled out the recycled paper from her pocket, the map brochure she had drawn on. It was creased, smudged, but the line was clear. The bypass a slippage arc. She held it up. "Just try it," she said. "Spin it like I did." Monroe didn't reach for it, but someone behind him did. A woman, mid-30s, sharp eyes, quiet all morning. She studied the page. "This is modeled slippage?" she asked. Zoe nodded. The woman turned to Monroe. "With all due respect, sir, we've overlooked this exact phase in simulations. If she's right, we could be amplifying instability at scale." The silence that followed wasn't laughter. It was fear. Then Monroe turned back toward Zoe. His smile tightened. "Fine," he said. "Build your model. Prove us wrong." His voice rose. But if you fail, don't come back? Zoe stared at him, then down at her notebook, her broken pencil still tucked between the pages. She closed it and said, "Challenge accepted." Zoe stood in the hallway, her notebook clutched tight to her chest. Behind her, the lecture hall doors shut with a hollow thud. The air smelled like old carpet and new fear. Ronan caught up, breath short. That could have gone worse. She didn't answer. He reached for her shoulder. "You held your ground. That means something." But all Zoe could hear was Monroe's voice echoing in her skull. "Build your model. Prove us wrong. Fail. And don't come back." She blinked hard. "I will prove it." Ronan looked her in the eye. "Then we start now." They walked through the Harvard engineering wing, polished floors, glass walls, silent corridors. Zoe's reflection followed her, small and out of place. Ronan opened a side door. Inside, a room lined with old whiteboards and empty shelves. The air was cold. Half the lights flickered. "It's not much," Ronan said, "but it's quiet and the tools are real." Zoe stepped in slowly. One desk, one computer, one beat-up magnetic wheel, disassembled, rust along the edges. She pulled out her broken pencil and wrote one word across the whiteboard. "Re-entry." Ronan nodded. "You have 3 days. Monroe moved up the announcement. He's deploying in 5 states on Thursday." Zoe froze. 3 days? He thinks you'll give up. She looked at the pieces of the wheel. Bolts scattered, wires frayed, and thought of Ray's cough echoing in their trailer. "I won't." That night, she slept under the desk. Her notebook was her pillow, her jacket, her blanket. The whiteboard was covered now, diagrams stacked on diagrams, arrows, gaps, slippage, curves. She hadn't eaten since morning. Her hands were blistered from turning the wheel over and over. Every time it spun, the bypass dipped, then jolted. The model fought itself. She stared at the red marker circling the node, the unconnected bypass. "It's not a flaw," she whispered. "It's a rhythm." Day 2. A knock on the door. Ronan walked in carrying a tray, bagels, fruit, 2 cups of tea. Zoe didn't look up. He set the tray down. "You've been at it for 22 hours. She wiped the sweat from her brow. "Still not right." He sat beside her. "Zoe, listen, Monroe doesn't want to believe you. He doesn't care where you came from. He only sees what he already knows." Zoe closed her notebook gently. "Then I'll show him something he's never seen." Ronan smiled, then pointed to the small fan on the table. "Have you tested airflow through the bypass instead of force?" Zoe's eyes lit up. She grabbed the fan, wired it to the edge of the model, spun the wheel again. And this time, no jolt. The spin continued, smooth, soft. Recovered energy curved back into the system. Her voice cracked. "It's returning." She flipped to a blank page and began to write. Force coefficients, cycle ratios, airflow vectors. Then circled it all. She whispered, This is it." Ronan stared at the board. "You just stabilized $1 billion system with a broken pencil and a Carnival wheel." Zoe looked up. "No," she said, "with rhythm." Day 3. The sun broke through the window. Zoe stood at the front of the same lecture hall where Monroe had challenged her. The prototype sat on the table, the bypass connected, the fan turning. The room was full. Monroe stood in the front row, his arms crossed. "You asked for proof," Zoe said. "This is phase-controlled slippage with predictive recovery." She spun the wheel. It turned once, then twice. The fan caught, and the red line on the side traced a full cycle. No loss. Zoe looked up, her voice steady. "I built it. I showed you. I'm still here." Monroe said nothing, but the room, silent, watching, waiting. Zoe took a breath, then said louder now, "And I'm not leaving." The hallway lights flickered as Zoe walked into the makeshift lab just past midnight. Her feet dragged, her hoodie was damp with sweat, and her eyes burned from no sleep. She dropped her backpack beside the desk and collapsed into the chair. Her worn notebook lay open, pages crinkled from use. The red ink circle around the bypass node had begun to smear. She traced it again, firmer this time. "I won't give up," she whispered. The room was quiet, just the hum of an old desktop fan and the soft scratch of her pencil against paper. She flipped back 3 pages, then 5, then all the way to the beginning. Sketches of the graviton, diagrams of Carnival gears, arrows, ratios, angles, pieces of a language only she had built. The wheel prototype sat in front of her, patched together with salvaged wire and bolts from a bicycle. She spun it once. The fan buzzed. The slippage curve blinked on her hand-drawn overlay. Still not clean. Zoe clenched her jaw. "There's something I'm not seeing." She leaned forward, forehead pressing to the edge of the desk. A soft cough broke the silence. She turned. Uncle Ray stood in the doorway, wrapped in a blanket, face pale. "You haven't been home." "I was close," she said. He walked slowly to the desk, coughing again, then picked up the broken pencil. "Still using this thing?" She nodded. "It works, just enough to matter." He looked at the wheel. "What are you really chasing here, Zoe?" Zoe's voice cracked. "You remember when the power went out for 3 days? The heat wave?" Ray nodded. "You passed out on the floor. We didn't have backup. We didn't have anything. I kept thinking, if the system had just stored a little more, if the cycle had held." She looked up at him. "I'm not fixing a wheel. I'm saving you." Ray sat slowly beside her. "You already are." By sunrise, she was back at it. 2 wires snapped from the wheel's base. She rewired them using bobby pins from her pocket. The fan's motor slowed. Too much friction. She greased it with leftover machine oil from the popcorn engine. Her fingers were blistered. Her eyes red. Still, she wrote. Every correction added to the notebook. Every attempt mapped on recycled scraps. Then, as the morning light hit the whiteboard, she noticed something. The slippage arc she had drawn was always curved. But what if it didn't have to be? She stared at it, slipped a new sheet beneath the old one, held them to the light. They didn't match. Her hand trembled. She adjusted the wheel's offset weight by a few millimeters, swapped the fan's mounting angle by 10 degrees, then spun it. Once, twice. The fan powered on. This time it didn't dip. The bypass cycled through, clean, steady, predictable. Zoe backed away slowly. No jolt? She whispered. She grabbed her pencil and wrote in all caps, equilibrium through offset, not return. Her voice trembled. That's it. Just then, the door swung open. Ronan burst in, holding 2 coffees. You're not gonna believe this? She turned to him, still stunned. He froze. Wait, what happened? Zoe pointed to the wheel. I balanced it. The bypass isn't fighting anymore. It's sinking. Ronan stared, then moved closer. He watched the spin, listened. No loss? Zoe nodded. It's not about making it perfect, she said. It's about building it to survive the loss. Ronan blinked, then whispered, Zoe, this changes everything. She closed her notebook softly. The pencil slid between the pages, and for the first time in days, she smiled. The lecture hall filled fast. Harvard engineers, government contractors, graduate students in suits. Zoe stood backstage, gripping her notebook like a lifeline. Her broken pencil was wedged inside, the tip worn to the wood. Ronan adjusted her. Prototype on the table, Carnival wheel, copper wires, the tilted fan, the same one she built with the scraps. Now it sat on the stage at Harvard. You ready? He asked. Zoe swallowed. Not really, he smiled. Good. That means you care. Professor Monroe stepped onto the platform, tapping his microphone. Thank you all for attending today's presentation on final energy loop protocols. We'll begin with a summary of our Velour deployment plan. He paused. But first, a demonstration. One of our younger contributors insists she's solved our return phase dilemma. Laughter trickled from the audience. Monroe turned to Zoe. You have 5 minutes. Zoe stepped forward. Her hoodie sleeves were frayed. Her sneakers still had oil from the Graviton steps. She took a breath. I'm Zoe Alvarez. I built this using wheel dynamics from a Carnival ride. It's not pretty, but it works. The crowd murmured. She reached out and spun the wheel. Once, twice. The bypass fan turned. The red slippage arc curved smoothly. No jolt, no drop. The LED light on the base flickered, then steadied. Bright, constant. Zoe pointed. That's retention, continuous, compensated loss through offset spin, not force increase. Silence. Then a voice in the back. That's impossible. Another, where's the simulation data? Ronan stepped forward, holding her notebook. She didn't use a software. She used this. He opened the notebook, flipping through pages. Hand-drawn equations, taped diagrams, recycled brochures turned into models. The final page, equilibrium through offset, not return. Professor Monroe frowned. That's not how system loops are taught. Zoe looked at him, calm now. It's not how they're taught, but it's how they work. Someone in the front row leaned forward. Can she explain the re-entry curve? Zoe walked to the board. She drew 2 circles, one rigid, one elastic. This is your model, fixed cycle. It assumes perfect retention, but real systems lose constantly. So I changed the structure, not to fight the loss, but to predict it. She tapped the second circle. Think of it like breath. Inhale, exhale. Control the rhythm, and you stay balanced. Lose the rhythm, and the system collapses. A woman near the aisle stood up. She just stabilized a field scale loop using adaptive friction. Gasps. Heads turned. She's right, the woman added, That explains the data noise from Site B last quarter. We dismissed it. Monroe's face hardened. That was thermal miscalibration. No, the woman said. It was this. Zoe stepped back. Her voice was small but steady. I didn't come here to prove anyone wrong. I came because my uncle almost died when our power failed. I needed to know why. She looked out across the room. I just didn't expect to be the only one who saw it. The silence was heavy now, and then clapping. One row, then two, then the room. Monroe didn't move, but his eyes were no longer cold. He looked at the wheel, at the spinning fan, at the red arc that never dipped, then at the girl in the gray hoodie. Ronan leaned close to Zoe and whispered, I never saw that coming. Zoe opened her notebook again, slipped the pencil between the pages, and whispered back, I did. The applause faded. The room slowly emptied. Zoe stood by the prototype, fingers trailing the edge of the spinning wheel. The red marker line, still smooth, looped perfectly, like breath in motion. Ronan leaned on the edge of the stage. You okay? She nodded, but her voice was quiet. I think so. He studied her face. You've never told them, have you? Zoe looked down. Told them what? Why you really built it? She didn't answer. Later that night, back at the trailer, Zoe sat at the tiny kitchen table, her notebook open in front of her. Uncle Ray sat across from her, a mug of warm broth between his shaking hands. The soft hum of a box fan buzzed in the window. You didn't eat again, he said gently. Zoe traced a finger over her last equation. I wasn't hungry. He leaned forward. I saw the clip online. You held your own, Zoe. She blinked fast. They listened. Finally. Ray smiled faintly. You're making him proud, you know. Zoe froze. Her pencil slipped. A streak of graphite cut across the corner of the page. Ray's voice softened. I know you think I've forgotten, but I haven't. She closed the notebook and whispered, I still hear him, sometimes. Ray leaned back. Me too. Zoe stood up, walked to the cabinet, and pulled out a dusty plastic bin. She placed it on the table and opened it slowly. Inside were photos, tools, a rusted name tag, Miguel Alvarez, station tech. She held it up. He worked double shifts that summer, she said, never complained. Said the grid needed people who noticed the quiet things. Ray's hands trembled as he picked up one of the old photos, Miguel laughing, holding Zoe on his shoulders. Zoe continued. The day the blackout hit, he was already sick. The machines couldn't keep his meds cold. The hospital, generator failed. Mom tried calling for help. Her voice broke. Nobody came. Ray looked at her, his eyes full. Zoe took a breath. So when I saw the bypass flaw, I didn't just see numbers, I saw a gap that no one wanted to fix. A crack big enough for someone like him to fall through. Ray wiped his eyes with the corner of his sleeve. You fixed it, Zoe. No, she said. I answered it. The next morning, Zoe sat with Ronan in a small Harvard conference room. A few professors sat at the other end of the table, reviewing her designs. One of them, Dr. Whitley, folded her hands and looked up. You mentioned a personal loss yesterday, she said. Would you be willing to elaborate? Zoe hesitated, then opened her notebook to a page she hadn't shown before. A photo taped in the corner, Her dad, smiling beside the graviton, holding a blueprint drawn on a napkin paper. She turned the notebook around. This is Miguel Alvarez, my father. He worked at a small energy station south of LA. The summer before I turned 11, he died during a 3-day outage. Power failure, poor storage. He told me once, the grid doesn't care who you are, only if you see it coming. The room was still. Zoe continued, voice trembling but steady. I built this because I never got to say goodbye, because he trusted the system to protect us, and it didn't. So now I'm building a system that won't forget people like him. She slid the notebook forward. And I'm not done. Dr. Whitley's voice was quiet. Thank you for sharing that. Ronan watched her closely. You didn't have to. Zoe met his eyes. I did. She reached for the notebook, and as she closed it, the broken pencil slipped free and hit the table with a soft tap. No one spoke, but for the first time, they all understood. The hallway buzzed with whispers. Zoe stood outside the engineering lab, her notebook clutched tight against her chest. Her name was already fading from the whiteboard by the door, wiped clean as if she'd never been there. A young grad student walked past, glancing at her with a half smirk. Told you it wouldn't last, he muttered. She didn't flinch. Inside, the lights were off. A new lock had been added to the door. Her prototype? Gone. She stood there for a moment, then turned and walked back toward the main building. Every step echoed louder than the last. In the dean's office, the tension was thick. Professor Monroe sat stiffly at the end of the table. Dr. Whitley was beside him, arms folded, gaze sharp. Zoe sat across from them, her notebook on her lap. Her pencil, still broken, rested on top. Monroe cleared his throat. Miss Alvarez, questions have been raised regarding the origin of your design. Zoe's eyes narrowed. What kind of questions? Whitley answered, her voice calm. Some are suggesting your model borrows heavily from unpublished Velar data. Ronan spoke up from the corner. That's not true. I saw her work. She built it from scratch. Monroe cut in. Be that as it may, without formal affiliation or lab credentials, the model's legitimacy is vulnerable. Zoe leaned forward. So now it's about credentials? Monroe didn't respond. She tapped her notebook gently. You asked for proof. I gave it, and when it worked, you locked the door. Whitley looked at her carefully. The concern isn't just the model, it's access. You were working without clearance. That opens us to liability. Ronan stood. She was invited by me. If there's a problem, it's with the system, not her. Monroe stared at Zoe. We're reviewing your data. Until then, I recommend you step back from the project. Zoe stood slowly. Her voice was low but steady. You can review whatever you want, but you can't erase what I built? She turned to leave, but paused at the door. They say the system's broken, but it's not. It's working exactly how it was built, to keep people like me out. Outside, the air was cold. Zoe sat on the stone steps beneath the lecture hall, her notebook open across her knees. The pages fluttered in the wind. Ronan joined her a few minutes later, carrying a cup of tea. Here, he said. She took it silently. I'm sorry, he said. They can't take it, she whispered. The wheel's still spinning. I know it. Ronan nodded. Stand your ground. You didn't steal this. You solved it. She held up the broken pencil. This is all I used. He smiled. Then that pencil just changed the game. Just then, a figure approached from the path. Dr. Whitley. She stopped in front of them, her voice quiet. There's a meeting tomorrow. Open panel. You'll have 5 minutes to present your model formally. Under challenge. Zoe looked up. And if I say no? Whitley's expression didn't change. Then they'll say you back down. Zoe stared at the horizon, then closed her notebook. I'll be there. That night, in the trailer, Uncle Ray poured hot water into 2 chipped mugs. He slid one toward Zoe. You look like someone who's about to walk into a storm. Zoe smiled faintly. I am. He pulled something from a drawer. A photo of Miguel in his work uniform, folded but clean. Then take him with you, Ray said. Let them hear what you've really built. Zoe tucked the photo into the back of her notebook. The pencil rested beside it. And though the storm was coming, she didn't feel small anymore. The panel room was packed. Professors lining the front row, grad students whispering in clusters, cameras set up in the back. A placard read, Velar Retention Loop, Open Challenge Forum. Zoe stood just behind the curtain, notebook in hand. Her broken pencil rested between the pages. Her fingers trembled slightly, but her eyes were calm. Ronan adjusted the mic at the podium. 5 minutes, he whispered. That's all you need. She nodded. They can't deny it now. Professor Monroe sat in the front, arms crossed, face unreadable. Dr. Whitley glanced toward the stage, giving Zoe a small nod. The moderator stepped forward. Today's open session will begin with a presentation from Zoe Alvarez, independent contributor. She will demonstrate her proposed correction to the velar bypass flaw. A few chuckles rippled through the back row. Zoe stepped up. She placed the notebook on the table, opened it to the marked page, and held up the broken pencil. I built my model with this, she said, not because I had to, but because it's what I had. She flipped to the final diagram, hand-drawn, taped over with tracing paper and red thread pinned to show the energy loop. This isn't theory, it's motion, controlled slippage using offset resonance. I didn't simulate it, I spun it over and over until I found the rhythm that held. She stepped back and turned on the portable prototype. The wheels spun. The bypass fan turned, and the light, powered by the recovered phase energy, glowed bright. The audience was quiet. Zoe looked up. You asked for proof. This is my work. Then she turned off the model and stepped aside. A beat passed. Then Monroe stood. He walked slowly to the table, examined the model, then the notebook. He lifted a page, revealing the sketches dated weeks before Zoe ever entered Harvard's halls. He didn't speak at first, but when he did, his voice was low. Where did you get these equations? Zoe met his eyes. I wrote them. He raised a brow. Without training? With motion, she said. With friction. With grief. A murmur passed through the room. Someone called out, "Run the original logs." Whitley pulled out a USB. She plugged it into the main screen, loading Zoe's prototype logs. Timestamps, velocity dips, phase return percentages, all handwritten. scanned from her notebook, then mapped to the Velar field trial data. Overlay on overlay. And the result? Perfect match. The audience erupted in disbelief. One professor leaned forward. Her retention curve aligns with the anomalies from Site C. We thought it was noise. Another? This slippage model, it explains the drag losses in Florida. Whitley turned to the room. It's not noise. It's the only correction we've seen that holds at scale. Zoe stood motionless. Ronan whispered, "They can't deny it now." But Monroe still didn't speak until finally he stepped back and looked at the crowd. "Her model is real," he said quietly, "and we missed it." Zoe's hand tightened around her pencil. She stepped forward again, voice shaking only slightly. "I didn't come here for credit. I came because someone I loved died when the system failed. I just needed to know why." She looked down at the notebook, the pages stained, corners worn. This model wasn't built in a lab. It was built in a trailer, at night, in silence. And I'm not ashamed of that. The room was still until one voice, clear from the back, called out. She just rewrote the loop. Then the clapping started, not all at once, but steady, stronger. And Zoe stood in the middle of it, broken pencil in one hand, her father's photo in the other, finally seen. Rain tapped softly against the windows of Ronan's office. Zoe sat across from him, damp from the walk over, her notebook balanced on her knees. The broken pencil lay beside it, dull and cracked, still refusing to quit. She stared at the floor. "They clapped," she said. "And still, I don't know what happens next." Ronan leaned forward. "You rewrote a billion-dollar loop from the inside of a trailer. That's what happened." So he didn't smile. He continued. "And now the board wants to meet full faculty. You'll be offered entry into the early research cohort with a scholarship." Her head lifted slowly. "A full scholarship?" she whispered. He nodded. "You earned it." Zoe's voice cracked. "I'm not supposed to be here." "No," Ronan said. "You're supposed to build what they never imagined." Later that day, as Zoe walked through the courtyard, she passed a bench where Professor Monroe sat alone beneath a gray umbrella. His posture, for once, was not stiff, but tired. She stopped. For a moment, neither said anything. Then Monroe looked up. "You dismantled my model." Zoe stepped forward. "I didn't mean to." "No," he replied. "You meant to understand it, and that's harder." She sat beside him, carefully keeping the notebook out of the rain. He turned to her. "You made me look again at my students, at the gaps I've ignored." Zoe waited. Monroe reached into his coat and pulled out a folded document. "This is an appointment letter, Research Associate, Renewable Systems Division. I want you to work with us, not around us." Zoe blinked. "You believe in me?" Monroe exhaled slowly. "We almost missed you." She opened her notebook, flipped to the page where the red thread still stretched across her phase diagram, and laid the pencil down on the signature line. "I'm not here to impress anyone," she said. "I just want to build things that last." Monroe offered a faint smile. "Then we'll build this together." Back at the trailer, the lights buzzed overhead as Uncle Ray sat at the table, poring over Zoe's notebook. You did it, he said, voice thick. Zoe poured tea into a chipped mug. Not yet. He looked up. They're offering you a place. That's more than I ever saw coming. She sat beside him. But what if they expect me to know everything already? What if I fall behind? Ray tapped the notebook gently. You've been solving their problems before they even knew what they were. Zoe hesitated, then reached into her bag and pulled out a thick envelope. This came today. Ray unfolded it. Inside was the Harvard seal, her name, full academic scholarship. He laughed, a sound filled with disbelief. This is real. Zoe nodded slowly. They said I'll start with a research stipend, work study. I'll be designing upgrades to the very thing they told me I didn't belong near. She picked up her broken pencil and set it on the counter next to her dad's photo. It's not just for me, she said. Ray looked at her, pride brimming in his eyes. No, it's for all of us. That night, in the quiet hum of the trailer, Zoe opened a fresh page in her notebook. The corners were still bent, the spine still torn, but this page was blank. She wrote one line in the center. What else haven't they seen yet? She underlined it once, then picked up the broken pencil and began to sketch again. The auditorium lights dimmed as Zoe stood just off stage, heart pounding beneath her pressed second-hand blazer. Her worn notebook, wrapped in elastic bands and covered in sketches, rested in her hands. The broken pencil was tucked inside. Still there, still hers. Ronan appeared beside her, straightening his tie. You okay? Zoe stared at the curtain. Everyone keeps calling me a genius. You're not? I'm a girl from a trailer who watched a wheel spin long enough to see something no one else did. Ronan smiled. That's exactly what genius is. The announcer's voice echoed through the hall. Tonight, Harvard University recognizes Zoe Alvarez, the youngest recipient of a full academic scholarship and honorary research position in the Renewable Systems Division. Zoe stepped into the light. The crowd rose as she walked on stage, but Zoe barely noticed. Her eyes searched for one face, Uncle Ray, sitting in the second row, jacket too big, smile too wide. She reached the podium. Flashes went off. She cleared her throat, gripping the edge tightly. I don't come from a lab or a textbook. I come from a carnival. From grease-stained hands and spinning rides. From a man who taught me that silence doesn't mean ignorance. She opened her notebook, flipped to the sketch of her first model, drawn in chalk on a cracked wheel. I made mistakes. I worked with broken things, but I learned that broken doesn't mean useless. Her fingers tapped the pencil resting in the crease. This pencil is cracked, but it's drawn every page that got me here. She looked out at the crowd. I accept this scholarship not because I belong in your world, but because your world finally saw mine. Backstage, Uncle Ray met her with tears in his eyes. He pulled her into a hug. You did it. Zoe held on tight. I did it for us. He touched the notebook. Keep that close. I always do. A photographer stepped forward. Can we get a photo of the scholar? Zoe looked at Ray. Only if he's in it too. Later that night, in a quiet study room, Zoe sat alone at a desk near the window. Outside, the campus glowed with golden lamps. Inside, she flipped through her notebook, now half full. A knock. Dr. Whitley stepped in, holding a small envelope. They asked me to deliver this personally. Zoe opened it. Inside, a gold-sealed letter. Harvard undergraduate enrollment confirmed. Division of Engineering, with full academic honors. She stared at the words, then whispered, "They really let me in." Whitley sat beside her. "We didn't let you in, Zoe. You opened the door yourself." Zoe smiled, quiet and full, then paused. "There's still pressure. I still don't know everything." Whitley nodded. "None of us do, but you know how to look. That's what matters." Zoe reached into her bag and placed the pencil on the desk beside the envelope. Whitley tilted her head. "You still write with that thing?" Zoe grinned. "It still works." At home, Uncle Ray framed the scholarship letter, hung it above the kitchen sink. Beneath it, he taped a photo, Zoe holding the notebook, standing beside her wheel prototype. Every time he passed it, he touched the corner, like it anchored something real. And at Harvard, Zoe kept writing each night one more page, not because she had to, but because the world had finally started listening and she had more to say. The sun set orange behind the distant hills as Zoe stepped into the old community center, now glowing with clean, steady light. The power had stayed on for 56 straight days, a record for their side of Los Angeles. Kids crowded around a repurposed ride panel, now powering ceiling fans and charging the stations. In the corner, a bulletin board read, "Velar Retention Grid, Pilot Zone Alpha." She smiled. Uncle Ray leaned against the doorway. "You seeing this?" Zoe nodded. "I didn't think it would roll out this fast." "They ran the numbers," he said. "Your model cut energy loss by almost 12%. City Council approved 10 more zones." Zoe knelt beside a small boy tracing wires with his finger. "What's that do?" "It sends the extra spin back through the fan," he said proudly, "so the light doesn't blink." She ruffled his hair. "Exactly right." Earlier that week, Zoe had stood in a university lab as engineers ran her prototype through final diagnostics. The Velar system, once flawed, now pulsed in harmony thanks to a teenager's worn notebook and the rhythm of Carnival gears. A professor held up her latest blueprint, now cleaned up and digitized. "This is being shipped to Austin, to Dakar, to Mumbai." Zoe stared at the schematic. It was hers, still labeled "Slippage Compensation, Alvarez Offset Model." She whispered, "They're building it." Dr. Whitley appeared at her side. "Because you didn't just fix the loop, you reimagined who gets to lead it." Back at the community center, an older woman approached, holding Zoe's hand in both of hers. "I remember your dad," she said softly. "He used to check our breakers when no one else would." Zoe felt her throat tighten. "He just wanted to keep people safe." "You've done that," the woman said. "You changed our lives." Zoe looked down at the table where her broken pencil now rested inside a display case next to the first paper wheel sketch. Not behind glass for glory, but to remind every kid who passed that something broken could still write the future. Later that night, Zoe walked the quiet street home, her notebook slung under one arm. She paused beneath a glowing lamppost, one powered by her model. She flipped to the last page, then opened a fresh one. The breeze moved the paper gently. She wrote, "Cycle held, light stayed on, let's try again." A voice behind her. "You're still writing?" Ronan asked. She turned, grinning. "The loop's never really finished?" He nodded toward the homes now lit down the street. "You realize you've already done more with one notebook than most teams with labs and grants." Zoe looked back at the lights. "This isn't just about proving something anymore," she said. "This is for them, for every blackout we survived, for everyone who thought they didn't belong in the system. I want them to see this and know you can build the system yourself." Ronan took a deep breath. "So, what's next?" Zoe tucked the pencil into the spine of the notebook, then smiled. "Something new." She walked forward, light trailing behind her. The rooftop was quiet. From up here, Zoe could see the patchwork of lights spreading across the city, pulsing in time with the grid she helped rewire. A soft hum filled the night, steady, resilient. No flickers, no blackouts. She sat on the ledge, notebook open on her lap, the broken pencil resting in the fold. A breeze tugged gently at the corners of the pages. Footsteps behind her. Uncle Ray appeared, carrying 2 steaming mugs. "Still writing?" Zoe took one. "Always." He looked out over the lights. "You remember when we used to sit in the dark and guess when power would come back?" She nodded. "Now it stays on." Ray smiled. "Because you didn't wait for someone else to fix it." She turned the page in her notebook, revealing the next set of sketches. Circular turbines, smaller, mobile. "I've been thinking about micro units for rural homes, places no one funds." Ray glanced at the pencil. "Same one." Zoe grinned. "Wouldn't feel right using anything else." Down below, the community center buzzed with quiet conversation. A small ceremony had just ended. Zoe had been honored by the city council for her contribution to regional sustainability. Nothing flashy, just folding chairs, a paper banner, and kids wearing t-shirts that read, "Build it anyway." Inside, a young girl pressed her face to the display case, holding Zoe's first sketches. "Mom," she whispered, "she drew that with that pencil?" The mother nodded. "That's how it started." The girl pulled a crumpled grocery receipt from her pocket. On the back, a triangle and some numbers, her own idea, just forming. Outside, Zoe walked past the window and paused. She saw the girl and smiled. Later that evening, Ronan found her in the corner of her new workspace. The room still smelled like fresh paint and sawdust. Her desk, simple wood, chipped at the edges, sat under a large skylight. He knocked gently. "They sent you something." Zoe looked up. He held out a velvet case. She opened it slowly. Inside, a golden plaque inscribed with her name and the title, "Lead Research Fellow, Applied Systems Engineering." She touched the edge. "It feels heavy." Ronan sat beside her. "Because it is." Zoe leaned back in her chair. "What if I don't always have the answer?" "You won't," he said. But you've already taught us how to ask the right questions. She tapped the plaque lightly, then set it beside the pencil. This is just the start. That night, Zoe climbed to the lab's roof again, the sky wide and quiet above her. She opened to the last page of her notebook, creased and smudged, the lines slightly faded from rain. She wrote, "Talent isn't where you play, it's where you dare to create." She looked out over the lights below. Each one meant something now. Each one stayed on because she refused to wait for permission. And as she closed the notebook, she heard a sound behind her, the soft squeak of a new wheel. A kid, maybe 10, holding a rusted Carnival part, walked up slowly. "I found this," he said. "It spins weird. Thought maybe you'd want it." Zoe took the piece, ran her fingers along the edge. Unbalanced, bent, beautiful. She looked at him. "What's your name?" "Marcus," he said. "You like to build?" He nodded shyly. Zoe handed him the broken pencil. He stared at it. "It's yours." "Not anymore," she said. "Now it's yours." Marcus grinned. Zoe turned back to the skyline. Another page filled with light, and the loop just beginning again.